So, what makes me cranky about Sully? Well, mainly that it's not much of a movie. Apparently landing a plane on the Hudson River without killing everyone on board doesn't have that much to it. Sure, you've got Clint Eastwood directing it, so it looks like a big Hollywood movie. And you got Tom Hanks and Aaron Eckhart starring in it, so it's acted like a big Hollywood film, but ultimately there's so little to this movie that it might as well just be a History Channel special. In fact, there were times when it would fade to black, and I half expected it to cut to an interview with somebody who was there, or an expert who was going to explain something that we just saw, just like you'd see in one of those kind of things. Normally with a movie called something like Sully, you'd expect it would give you a really good look at the man. You'd follow him from, being a kid, first getting interested in aviation through his life up to the flight that would ultimately make him famous. You'd see him meet his wife, have kids, struggle through being a commercial airline pilot, and all the rest of that stuff, but nope. Here you only really get a couple of very brief looks into his past. His interactions with his family are basically just a few phone calls with his wife, whose content is pretty mundane. I mean, it's exactly the stuff you'd expect a guy to talk to his wife about in a situation he was in. The trailers make it look like they were going to make this all about a battle between him and the NTSB to clear his name and to prove he was right, and while there is some of that in this movie, it's really shallow. If you take away the slightly cartoony villain tone that the NTSB actors are using, it would all seem entirely reasonable and totally without any kind of drama whatsoever. In fact, the supposedly triumphant moment where Sully and his co-pilot are vindicated, everybody just does a complete 180, like, yeah, you guys are awesome, we're sorry we questioned it, and tried to blame you for everything. No big deal. Obviously, in the interim, Sully struggles with whether or not he did the right thing, but mostly that just means he stares out a window for too long, or has to go for a jog in the middle of the night occasionally to clear his head. It doesn't affect a single relationship he has in the movie, and it doesn't really change his behavior at all. He's just the same guy at the beginning of the movie as he is at the end of the movie. I mean, he's mildly overwhelmed by the sudden fame at points, but that's also just very briefly touched on. I really didn't feel like I got to know anything more about him than I did from watching the real Captain Sullenberger on TV when it happened. Another way you might normally make this into an actual movie is to over-dramatize it, right? You'd meet Sully and his crew and a bunch of different passengers that all have their own quirks and personal dramas going on, and it would all build up to those 208 seconds of terror in the sky as they think they're all going to die. But you don't see that either. You barely see anything of the passengers, in fact. Only a few of them even have actual lines outside of your, oh my god, we're all going to die kind of stuff. And unfortunately, while that 208 seconds no doubt seemed like an eternity for the people involved, it's still just a few minutes. So to get this movie up to its meager hour-and-a-half runtime, we have to go through that entire sequence at least 3 times. One of them is when they're listening to the cockpit voice recorder, and for a minute I thought, oh cool, what we're going to do is we're going to get the actual audio from the actual event, which I've heard before, and they'll just overlay that on top of our actors in our recreation here. But instead it was just a slightly longer take of the same stuff you saw 5 minutes ago. So in the end, it's basically just a series of the same kind of semi-dramatic reenactments you'd see on the History Channel, only with the spit and polish of a Hollywood production. If you added back the interviews you'd normally have, you'd even get the thing up to a full-on 2 hours. That's not to say it's a bad experience or that you won't have an emotional reaction to seeing people survive what should have been a horrific plane crash, but that's not really the movie at work, that's just the event. So sure, go see it in a theater if you like, but there's really nothing about this one that wouldn't work just as well on basic cable. And with basic cable, you won't have a couple of assholes a few rows up screwing around with their cell phones the whole time. Seriously, if you can't keep your hands off your phone for an hour and a half, leave it in your car before you end up needing a proctologist to look at it for you. But douchebags in the theater aside, that's my opinion of Sully. If you saw it or if you're interested in seeing it, leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And as we begin our final descent into the end of this video, please remember to make sure that your like and subscribe buttons are in their full click down positions. As always, we thank you for flying with us and wish you safe travels to your final destination.